My name is Dr. Kevin Peek. I am by profession an economist with nearly 30 years of experience in the private sector and in academia. My private sector experience includes having founded the Trade Policy Research Group in San Francisco, California. This was an organization that was largely dedicated to analyzing the content and impact of international trade policy. I also collaborated extensively with Peek Media, an award-winning documentary film company located in Berkeley, California. My academic experience includes instructional and/or administrative positions at the University of Nevada, Reno, Vista College in Berkeley, California, Northwestern Michigan College, the Victoria College in Victoria, Texas, Nichols College in Massachusetts, and currently South Texas College. And I know that sounds like a lot, but as you can see from the gray, I've been around for a while.
My name is Teo Sepulveda. I'm an economist here in South Texas College. The only possible background that could matter would be that I was raised in Mexico. I was born in the United States thanks to my dad. My dad was a trader, buy and sell imports and exports. So naturally, exchange rates, international finance, and international trade were my mother's milk, if you wish. I was raised in this context. So I was very interested in exchange rate between peso and Mexico because that affected my family's business. So therefore, I decided to become an economist because my dad said, you have to figure it out. So I did figure it out. I was raised in Monterrey. My dad is from Monterrey, Mexico, so I was raised there. My mom's from Mexico City. That's why I'm actually close to him. And but I was born in Houston, Texas, where it was the center of my dad's trading activities. I was educated in Monterrey until I was 19. And then I came to the United States to live full-time and be educated and graduated from the University of Texas Pan American back in the days in mathematics. And I graduated with my master's degree in economics from Georgia Southern University.
Before getting started, I would like to extend my gratitude to The Guardian for giving us this opportunity to share our research with the community. But I also like to confirm that in conducting our research, my colleague and I consistently maintain the highest degree of objectivity. At no time did we adopt a particular perspective or take any side, be it Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, or the side of any individual or group. Our mandate as economists is to consistently analyze economic phenomena in an impartial and objective manner. This is how we conducted the research, and this is what we hope to share with you today. What I'd like to do is proceed by identifying and elucidating what I consider to be the 5 most important outcomes of ongoing implementation of the proposed tariffs. Now, everything is a little bit unpredictable at this particular stage, but ongoing implementation, if we were to continue with the proposed tariffs, these are the 5 most important outcomes that I've identified. First, what we can expect is a generalized and continuous increase in prices. Now, this is going to occur for a number of different reasons. The 2 most important of which are, first, a significant percentage of products that are manufactured in the United States include components and parts that are imported. A good example of this, of course, which we've seen frequently in the media, is the automotive industry. Approximately 42.9% of all cars that are manufactured in the United States are imported from Mexico. Now, when you apply a tax on imported parts and components, that increases the cost of production in the United States. The manufacturer then passes those costs along to the consumer. So first of all, what we can see is that prices are going to increase directly as a consequence of tariffs applied on the inputs that are used in the manufacturing process. Second, we're going to see an increase in the price of imported finished goods. And I think we have a tendency in this country too often to underestimate the total volume and the market value of finished goods that are imported into the country. It is truly massive. And just to give you a few examples, Walmart on a yearly basis imports $50 billion worth of finished goods. The Home Depot imports $25 billion worth of finished goods. Target imports $20 billion worth of finished goods. Now, when finished goods are imported into the United States and a tariff is applied, contrary to what many believe, that tariff is not being applied or not being paid by the exporting country. That tariff is not being paid by the exporting company. That tariff is paid by the importer. The importer then passes those costs along to the consumer. So what we can expect is there's going to be a generalized and continued increase in prices for a number of different reasons that unfortunately we really don't have the time to explore exhaustively. But for these 2 reasons in particular, you increase the cost of imported parts and you increase the cost of imported finished products. So we're going to see an increase in the prices as a result of tariffs. Secondly, we're going to see a reduction in exports as a consequence of the retaliatory tariffs that are imposed by our trading partners. And we're already seeing this right now in this escalating trade skirmish between the United States and China. As you probably know, approximately 2 or 3 weeks ago, the United States imposed a 25% tariff on products imported from China, and this was a fairly generalized tariff. China quickly responded with a 34% tariff applied on exported U.S. goods and services. The United States then increased the tariff to an unprecedented 105%. Shortly thereafter, China announced that they would increase the tariff on U.S. imports by 80% on April 10th, I believe it was. And then the United States responded by increasing tariffs on Chinese imports to 125%. This kind of back and forth, tit for tat, escalating trade conflict doesn't help anyone. It damages both economies. It damages the citizens of both economies. Now, why is it that these retaliatory tariffs are going to adversely affect U.S. exports? Well, when you apply those tariffs on our exports, it increases the cost of those exports, it makes them less valuable, and it cuts back on demand. American corporations then have little choice but to cut back on production or close down altogether. In fact, it's estimated that in the next 12 months, if we are to continue with the proposed tariffs once again, in the next 12 months, we are going to see gross domestic product in the United States contract by approximately 8%. Gross domestic product, what does that mean? Gross domestic product is the market value of all goods and services produced in the United States in the space of 1 year. An 8% contraction in gross domestic product in the United States translates into us producing approximately $1.3 trillion less of goods and services, which then translates into literally, and these numbers are sometimes difficult to get our heads wrapped around, but what that then translates into is hundreds of thousands of Americans confronting the possibility of lower wages, cut benefits, and job loss. Which means, how do I pay the rent? How do I pay the mortgage? How do I pay groceries? And many of those Americans then seeking out additional government assistance. So tariffs that are ostensibly designed to promote economic growth and development in our economy, in this particular case, might elicit retaliatory tariffs that lead to a situation where we have a significant increase in unemployment and American citizens seeking government assistance. So, as a result of the tariffs, first, we're going to see an increase in prices. Second, we're going to see a reduction in our exports. The third consequence, and you've probably heard about this on the news, on the face of it, sounds fairly positive. The United States government is going to increase tax revenues over the next 12 years by approximately $258 billion. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Tariffs are applied, the tariffs are paid, revenues to the United States government increases by $258 billion. The important point to keep in mind, though, is who's paying these tariffs? As we mentioned a little bit earlier, when tariffs are applied on imported products, it's not the exporting country, it's not the exporting company, it's the importer that pays those tariffs. They then pass those costs along to U.S. consumers. So an increase of tax revenues of $258 billion is essentially going to be paid by American consumers. All right, so what do we got here as a result of the tariffs? Increased prices, a reduction in U.S. exports, an increased tax of approximately $258 billion financed by U.S. customers. What we're also going to see is a conspicuous and once again ongoing drop in income. It's estimated by the Tax Institute that the average family will see a 1.9% reduction in their income over the next 12 months. And to get an idea of how this occurs, let's go back to 2018, 2019, and we have an analog here. As we know, at that time, similar tariffs were applied on China. In particular, tariffs were applied on agricultural products imported into the United States from China. As a result of that tariff, China responded, as we mentioned earlier, and as would be expected, with a retaliatory tariff on U.S. agricultural exports into China. The long and the short of this was that American farmers lost $27 billion worth of income. The government then responded by compensating them, and of course that compensation came through subsidies that were financed by taxpayers. Alrighty, so at the risk of being redundant, let's see what we have here so far as a consequence of the implementation of these tariffs. Prices going up, a reduction in our exports, an increase in taxes, a fall in income. And finally, we can expect to see the same kind of erraticism that we've observed in the stock market over the last 2 weeks. As we know, the stock market approximately 2 weeks ago crashed. Now, this crash, while significant, wasn't without antecedents. Throughout the last 100 years, we've seen 4 similar crashes. The first was in 1929. Stock market crashed, and this crash was largely believed to have been the factor that had precipitated the Great Depression. And we call it the Great Depression not because it was great and it was a lot of fun, but because it was so unprecedented and it lasted for 10 years. Moreover, an important point to keep in mind to understand the possible consequences of continuing with these tariffs, that Great Recession was galvanized and perpetuated largely by the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were some of the largest tariffs that we have implemented in the history of our country. All right, so the first time we saw a crash of this magnitude was during the Great Depression. The second time we saw a crash like this was in 1987, and it was largely a consequence of an overvaluated stock market and the necessary corrections. The third time was in 2008 during the Great Recession, and we know the Great Recession began in the United States and spread throughout the international community. It was truly devastating. And for those of us old enough to remember that recession, it was frightening. The next stock market crash, 2020 during COVID. So when we think about these antecedent stock market declines occurring during COVID, occurring during the Great Recession, occurring during the Great Depression, all of them were for structural and or exogenous variables that were largely beyond our control. The recent stock market crash was not only predictable, but to a certain degree, it was self-inflicted. Once again, continued uncertainty associated with ongoing implementation of the proposed tariffs, from my perspective, will lead to the 5 aforementioned problems. And the question then becomes, why? Why are we implementing these tariffs? Well, the response that we've received is that the United States has not been treated fairly, that tariffs applied against the United States are exceptionally high. But let's take a minute and really analyze that. If we look at the tariffs that are applied by the European community on imported U.S. goods and services, it's equivalent to the tax or the tariff that the United States applies on imported goods and services from Europe. In other words, it's roughly 1.4%. Moreover, the tariffs between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, most of those are right around 0% under the auspices of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which ultimately became the USMC.
Than what I thought it was going to be. Thanks, by the way, this time. So some of the great things that he introduced were because on a daily basis, including politicians, the goods and services that we see from outside the United States tend to be things you see in Walmart or H-E-B that have, say, made in China. We tend to think that just putting a tax on a Chinese product immediately means just, okay, some products when you go to the supermarket are going to go up in price, just buy something else. What they do not see, the majority of the imports we get are of the goods and services we get from outside are inputs into production. So what really matters, and it's just that those are not visible. Let's say typical example would be that we sell very expensive and high quality oil to foreigners, and sometimes we buy less expensive oil for our process to be more efficient. That less expensive oil, now it's actually gonna be more expensive. Therefore, it's gonna be our production processes more expensive and less efficient, and therefore we're gonna have to start using some of the very expensive oil that we have in the United States instead of making money out of that export. Why? Because exports and imports are necessarily connected. This is not a problem just for the consumer. In order to to get this information to as much people as possible, we tend to emphasize a lot the consumer because the consumer will suffer. Like, that's for sure. Actually, just yesterday I was trying to order something from Argentina and Uruguay, and you could see the tax right there in the face. But the problem is that it's really the producer, because the producers do use foreign inputs, and that's the point of international trade. It's not just having more goods and services when you go to the supermarket, which obviously is an important issue. Is when you want to open a business, when you want to open a new business project, you want to have as much access to as many input resources as possible. And any type of tariff limits the access that we have to foreign resources because we need resources from the United States and resources from outside the United States. So both are affected. This is not a very peculiar thing about, oh, stop going to Walmart, stop going to... No, this affects absolutely every single part. And that's why we tend to, usually in general, we tend to say that maybe the only thing that can make overall prices rise is an excess in the money supply, because the money supply is used in money is used in every single market, so it can affect all markets together. Or maybe energy, some energy contraction can affect all markets together, so it can make all prices go up pretty much at the same time. And in this case, it's exactly what happens. Everything that we import and export affects every single market, one directly or indirectly. So you can actually make all things in all markets go up in price by the fact that we have less resources. It's like what we call a supply contraction. It's not like prices are going to rise, but because everyone's going out and doing business. Okay, that would be somewhat justifiable. But the problem is this one's going to be more expensive. Things are getting more expensive because we have less access to less goods and services for consumption, for our daily lives, for cost of living, for enjoy with our families, and for our production processes that are precisely how we generate the income in order to enjoy those goods and services that we end up buying later on with our friends and family. This has happened again, discussing again the issue with the farmers. It was perfectly predictable that every single exporter of the United States was going to be affected by taxing foreign imports because foreign countries were going to respond with retaliatory tariffs. It was completely predictable. And sadly, in the public mind, when they see, let's say, that Mexico, when we're dealing with Mexico, the government of Mexico doesn't retaliate, they extrapolate as if that's not going to happen with every other country. But not every other country is as close to us as Mexico, so they're going to behave completely different than the way that we deal with Mexican authorities. So this is a very serious issue. The Europeans could actually at any moment retaliate together with China, and actually would make pretty much, I don't know, it will be almost every single market now for sure will be somewhat one way or another affected, because it wouldn't be just the markets that depend on Chinese supply chains, but also European supply chains. So, and another issue that is very important that is a little bit difficult in the public mind, where you see in general in public, is that we have been treated unfairly by other countries by pointing out by some one item taxes. For example, with the Canada issue, people were publicizing some very high tariffs on certain specific products that the Canadian government would impose on American products. But what they didn't tell you is that those type of taxes are applied only when a very large quota of our exports go in. After a very large amount, then that is applied to that excess, if you wish. And the quota is so large that they have never been applied. It's just a sort of like a security feature in the law, just in case for some reason the Canadians start importing a lot of American products, so that maybe they don't go over the top and they don't disrupt local markets. Those are the little checks and balances on extreme cases. But the quotas are so big that they have never been applied. And then when you do, what really matters is aggregate exports. And so how much in total, all of them together, how much does the government get? You actually get that European, not just Canada, but even the European Union, all of the European countries, they charge only, on average, 1.3 of tariffs. 1.3, all of it together. You can actually tell them, oh, wait, but we're trying to, let's say, export cheese to the European Union, and you see the tax is like 25 or 5%. Yes, but there's like 10 or 5 other goods that have no tariff at all, or the tariff is like point something. Those specific microeconomic issues are important, and they matter a lot for that particular market, but we're discussing macroeconomic topics, and in macroeconomic topics, we cannot emphasize so much only one market, because one market does not represent the macroeconomy as a whole. So that will be my input so far, that the issue is much bigger than what people think, and we have not. It will be great if there was no tariffs. I am the one that thinks that there should be no tariffs whatsoever. A much better for all countries in general. A much better way to respect people's income, so as to reduce income taxes and to have some type of collection, it will be what we do in Texas, which is tax consumption. That will be my dream, but that's not going to happen into the next 100 years, but that's fine. That will be my dream. But on top of that, the tariffs we have suffered are not as big as people think. Maybe the Chinese, they're really big in general. Maybe there's some restrictions on trade that we have to kind of discuss them, but that's not going to be resolved by having tariffs on absolutely everything all at once and then switching them the next day and then switching them back the following day. And we can see the response of the markets. Something that for the public might actually be find it interesting. The best way to understand how does the stock market responds, it's a futures market, if you wish. The stock market represents the profits of American companies. So when the stock market falls today, it doesn't mean that things are bad today. No, that's not. It's in the next 12, 13 months, the profits of American companies more than likely will collapse. And even when the next day they recover, you still have to look and say, yes, maybe there's a recovery. You look at the level and then say, okay, so that means that if things are less bad than yesterday, then we're not going to be as bad in the next 13 years. But that doesn't mean we're going to be in good shape. We have to look at the total, and we're nowhere near back the height of last year, which means since the last year, a lot of investors were already discounting most of the problems that we're seeing here. So therefore, the prediction, if you wish you want to see it, that the markets are letting us know is that the economy is going to slow down very heavily. I don't know if this is helpful for you guys, but it's not just the markets themselves. We have the government itself predicting that there will be a contraction in the economy. This is real GDP, and these are the estimates. I don't know if you guys can see it. These are the estimates of the nearest, taking into consideration monthly data that we're getting as much as possible. We're trying to get some of the estimates. And so the contraction, okay. And so there's a predictable contraction at least in the first 3 months, January, February, and March. This is not just looking at financial markets and they rule our world. No. We're looking at actually objective data, not just an estimation of the future. The government itself, the Federal Reserve of Atlanta, actually does collect this type of data and does these estimations. Everywhere in the world we do this. And yes, why? Because we actually, for example, in January, we did see a big contraction in consumer markets. And in general, when there's a recession or a big contraction, sometimes not a recession, but a big contraction, usually the first ones to contract are the investment markets, producer markets. They're very sensitive to expectations about the future. So usually going to see them contract really quickly. But consumer markets, the things we buy in the grocery store, they tend to be very stable. We don't change our purchasing habits all that much, even during difficult times, maybe very little. The way we know that things are getting bad is not so much what happens. The market can go up and down. If things get better tomorrow, if tomorrow we have a better policy, then you're going to see the markets respond really quickly because it's future, right? It's not about the present. The same with investment. They can go up and down. Sometimes 2022, a lot of people thought there was going to be a recession because there was a big contraction in the housing, in the real estate market, but it did not expand towards the consumer markets, household markets. We would continue to go by grocery store as usually as we do. Nothing really changed. It was just a very limited contraction. In this case, since we did see a contraction in January, a heavy contraction that is not common on the consumer markets, then now we see, okay, this is a problem because more than likely the contraction is not just in one market, but in several markets at once.
Bringing manufacturing back to the United States, I'll be very brief, very succinct, is untenable. The cost of production in the United States are simply too high. The cost of labor, the cost of parts, regulations, and other variables. There is a reason that the United States is not a large manufacturer. There is a reason that we specialize in services, and the costs are simply too high. So where are your export markets? With these costs, we attempt to export manufactured products to the rest of the world, and they're simply not going to be able to compete. All right then, so we operate off of this assumption that we're going to impose these massive tariffs to keep manufactured products out. We'll then manufacture only in the United States. The costs are still there. So then either you pass those costs along to consumers, bringing that manufacturing back exponentially increases the cost of those manufactured products for consumers. So then what do? You automate. Well, if you automate, where are the jobs?